Professor Zixvorel stared at the 5 student files on his desk and sighed deeply. The Galactic University of Xenobiology had chosen him to lead this year's most dangerous field study. He rubbed his eye stalks in frustration. "Earth," he muttered. "Of all places, they want me to take students to Earth." The blue planet displayed on his screen was labeled with flashing red warnings. Class 12 Deathworld. Extreme gravity. Toxic atmosphere. Dangerous temperature variations. Unpredictable weather patterns. Aggressive wildlife. And somehow, incredibly, home to the galaxy's newest spacefaring species, humans. A soft chime announced the arrival of his 5 unlucky students. They filed into his office, each from a different species, but united by their excited expressions. None of them truly understood what they had signed up for. "Welcome," Professor Zixvorel said. "You 5 have been selected for the Earth Exchange Program. Before we continue, I must ask, do you all understand that Earth is classified as a death world?" Krillax, a blue Moraxian with 12 tentacles, waved 3 of them excitedly. "That's why I applied, Professor. Earth's oceans contain over 2 million species. 2 million. In just one planetary feature. I'm interested in their social structures," said Vixnura, her crystalline body glinting under the office lights. "Humans organize without a hive mind or telepathy. It's fascinating." Vreet clicked his mandibles together. The insectoid faction was the smallest of the group, barely reaching 1 meter tall. Their plant life has evolved defensive chemicals the humans intentionally consume as spices. I must study this. Their technology adapts to their dangerous environment, bubbled Bloop, his gelatinous form rippling with excitement. They harness electricity, a planetary defense mechanism, for entertainment. Elytrix, a quatrain who existed partially in 4 dimensions, shifted her form slightly. Their psychology interests me. They seek out danger for something called fun. This concept doesn't translate to any known language. Professor Zixvorel's eye stalks drooped further. Great. They were all death seekers or academic glory hunters. Our mission is to observe only. We will not interact with humans beyond our assigned liaison. You will follow safety protocols at all times. Earth's gravity alone could crush your internal organs if you're not wearing protective gear. The students nodded eagerly, clearly not grasping the danger. We leave tomorrow. The journey takes 8 days in fold space. Use that time to study the briefing materials thoroughly, the professor said. After the students left, Professor Zixvorel opened a communication channel to Earth. The face of a human female appeared on his screen. "Dr. Amy Wright here. How can I help, Professor?" "We arrive in 9 days, Doctor." The students are enthusiastic. Dr. Wright smiled. "First-timers always are. Don't worry, we'll keep them safe. The research station is in a remote location. Minimal wildlife encounters, moderate weather patterns, low human population density. They still don't understand." Elytrix asked if we could visit something called New York City. Dr. Wright laughed. "Let's start small. Maybe a trip to our local town after they've adjusted to our gravity and atmosphere." "Thank you for understanding," the professor said. "This is my first trip to Earth as well." "Really? Well, Wyoming in spring is beautiful. You might actually enjoy yourself, Professor." After ending the call, Zixvorel shuddered. Enjoy himself? On a death world. He quickly packed his multiple emergency survival kits, personal shield generator, and medical supplies. The university would blame him if any students died, and dealing with 5 different species' biological needs on a planet trying to kill them was going to be a nightmare. Meanwhile, on Earth, Dr. Amy Wright looked out her window at the gentle rolling hills and smiled. The aliens were going to be in for quite a surprise when they found out what made Earth so dangerous by galactic standards. She couldn't wait to see their faces when it rained for the first time. The alien research ship dropped out of fold space near Earth's moon. Through the viewports, the blue planet loomed large and terrifying. "Prepare your environmental suits," Professor Zixvorel instructed. Earth's gravity is 20% stronger than standard. Your suits will compensate, but you'll still feel heavy. The students triple-checked their equipment. Each suit was designed for their unique biology and included atmospheric filters, temperature regulators, and gravity compensators. Remember the emergency protocols, the professor continued. If your suit malfunctions, use your emergency bubble. It will provide 60 seconds of protection while we evacuate you. Their ship entered Earth's atmosphere, cutting through clouds as it descended toward Wyoming. The aliens watched nervously as the ground approached. So much water, Krulax whispered, his tentacles trembling inside his suit. It's everywhere. Look at those plants. Zreet clicked. They've covered the entire surface. An invasion. The ship landed at a small, isolated research station, a modest building surrounded by fields and forests, with mountains visible in the distance. Two humans waited outside. "Welcome to Earth," Dr. Amy Wright called as they exited their ship. Beside her stood a tall male human with dark hair. "This is my assistant, John Martinez," she explained. "We're excited to have you here." The aliens moved carefully, adjusting to Earth's gravity despite their suits. "Please come inside," John said. "We've prepared rooms for each of you with your specific environmental needs." Professor Zixforel scanned the area nervously. "Are there predators nearby?" Dr. Wright tried not to smile. "Nothing dangerous in the immediate vicinity. The station has protective fencing and sensors." Inside, the aliens marveled at the simple human facility. Bloop oozed excitedly within his containment suit as he examined a coffee maker. "This uses electricity," he bubbled. "Controlled lightning." "Sort of," John replied. "Would anyone like to try coffee? We can run it through your suit's analysis system first to make sure it's compatible with your biology." Elytrix shifted her four-dimensional form. Humans willingly consume stimulants. Fascinating. Dr. Wright showed them to their rooms. Each space had been modified for their specific needs. Zreet's room featured higher oxygen levels. Vix Nura's had special lighting for her crystalline form. Krulax included a small water tank. "Rest today," Dr. Wright suggested. "Tomorrow we'll begin orientation." Later that afternoon, dark clouds gathered outside. The aliens were in the common room when the first raindrops hit the windows. "What's that sound?" Vix Nura asked, her crystalline form vibrating with alarm. "Just rain," John said casually. "Water falling from the sky." "What?" Krulax's tentacles curled in horror. "The sky is attacking us." The aliens rushed to the windows. Water poured from the dark clouds, splattering against the glass. "It's acid." Zreet clicked in panic. "The atmosphere is dissolving." No, Dr. Wright explained. "It's just water, part of Earth's water cycle. Completely normal." Professor Zixforel turned all four eye stalks toward her. "You consider acid falling from the sky normal?" "It's not acid," John laughed. "Here, I'll show you." Before they could stop him, John walked outside without any protective gear. The aliens watched in horror as rain soaked his clothes and hair. "He's going to melt," Bloop gurgled. But John just stood there, smiling and holding his hands out to catch the raindrops. After a moment, he came back inside, dripping wet but completely unharmed. "See, just water," he said, shaking his head and spraying droplets. The aliens stared in disbelief. "Humans are waterproof," Elytrix whispered. That evening, as the students recorded their first observations, a small field mouse wandered into the common room through an open door. Its tiny paws made a slight scratching sound on the floor. Zreet spotted it first and froze. "PP predator." He clicked in terror. The room erupted in chaos. Bloop formed into a protective ball. Krulax fired up his emergency bubble. Vix Nura crystallized her outer layer into defensive spikes. "Emergency lockdown," Professor Zixforel shouted, activating the station's alarm system. Dr. Wright and John rushed in to find 5 terrified aliens and 1 confused mouse. "That's your predator," Dr. Wright asked, pointing at the tiny rodent. Don't get too close, Vix Neura warned. It could be venomous. John gently picked up the mouse and carried it outside, while Dr. Wright tried to explain that it was harmless. The aliens remained unconvinced. If that's considered harmless, Professor Zixforel muttered, I fear what you consider dangerous. After 3 days at the research station, the alien students began their field studies. Dr. Wright had created a schedule that would allow each of them to explore their specific interests while maintaining strict safety protocols. Krellax was the first to venture out. With Dr. Wright by his side, the tentacled Moraxian approached the small lake behind the station. Even through his protective suit, he trembled. Are you sure it's safe? He asked, his voice quivering. Perfectly safe, Dr. Wright assured him. This is just a small freshwater lake. Nothing in there bigger than a few fish. Fish. Krellax's voice rose in alarm. Aquatic predators. Small ones, Dr. Wright clarified. The biggest is maybe 8 inches long. They stood at the edge of the water. Dr. Wright knelt down and scooped some water in a clear container. Look, she said, holding it up. Microorganisms, algae, tiny insects, a whole ecosystem in just this handful of water. Krellax leaned closer, his scientific curiosity temporarily overcoming his fear. Then something moved in the lake. A small trout jumped, creating a splash. Krellax screamed and activated his emergency bubble, rolling back toward the station at high speed. Meanwhile, Vix Neura had convinced John to take her to the nearby town. The crystalline Lumidian was disguised in a human-shaped environmental suit with a darkened faceplate. They sat in a small diner called Sue's Place. Humans come here to consume nutrients, Vix Neura asked, watching people eat pancakes and drink coffee. Yes, but also to socialize, John explained. Watch how they interact. At a nearby table, 2 older men were talking. Weather's looking good for the weekend, Don, one said. Sure is, Pete. Thinking of going fishing if my back holds up, the other replied. Vix Neura recorded everything in her datapad. This exchange of weather information seems ritualistic. Are they sharing survival data? John tried not to laugh. Not exactly. It's called small talk. Humans do it to be friendly. Fascinating, Vix Neura said. And that substance they're consuming in cups. Coffee. It contains caffeine, a mild stimulant. They intentionally alter their neural functions. Vix Neura's crystalline structure flickered with alarm. Is this some kind of medical treatment? No, they just like how it tastes, and it helps them wake up in the morning. Vix Neura made more notes. Humans deliberately consume mind-altering substances for pleasure. Remarkable. Back at the station, Zreet was examining the lawn. The insectoid Thaxian moved carefully through the grass, collecting samples and taking readings. This is extraordinary, he clicked to himself. This plant species has covered the entire area around the human dwelling. It's everywhere. He moved a few feet and took another sample. Identical genetic structure. A coordinated organism, perhaps a hive mind. Zreet became increasingly convinced that grass was actually a highly evolved superorganism slowly taking over the planet. He began drawing maps of grass coverage, muttering about the green invasion. Nearby, Blup had discovered something that terrified him. A lawn sprinkler. The gelatinous osmosion had accidentally rolled over a hidden sprinkler head, causing it to start spraying water. Attack. Attack. Bloop gurgled, rapidly changing shape within his protective bubble. The ground is shooting liquid projectiles. Professor Zixforel rushed outside to find Bloop bouncing around in panic, trying to avoid the water spray. It took 20 minutes to explain that sprinklers were just human tools for watering plants. Inside the station, Elytrix was interviewing a local resident named Sam Collins, who Dr. Wright had invited to help with their research. So, Sam Collins, how would you describe your emotional state today? Elytrix asked, shifting slightly in her multidimensional form. Sam shrugged. Pretty good, I guess. Had a bit of a rough morning when I spilled coffee on my shirt, but otherwise fine. Elytrix's recording device beeped urgently. You experienced negative emotions earlier today, yet you continued normal function, without psychological support. Yeah, it was just spilled coffee. Remarkable. Elytrix noted. Subject experiences emotional damage yet continues operating. Possible evidence of advanced psychological resilience or emotional dampening technology. Sam looked confused. It's really not a big deal. Fascinating. Elytrix continued. Subject appears unaware of own extraordinary emotional recovery capabilities. That evening, all 5 students gathered with Professor Zixforel to share their findings. Each was convinced they had discovered something shocking about Earth and its human inhabitants. This planet, the professor summarized, is even more unusual than university records suggested. Continue your observations, but exercise extreme caution. Clearly, humans have evolved extraordinary capabilities to survive in this environment. We must learn more. 1 week into their Earth visit, Dr. Wright suggested an excursion to Grand Teton National Park. She thought the beautiful mountain views would help the aliens appreciate Earth's natural wonders. Professor Zixforel reluctantly agreed after reviewing safety reports and weather forecasts 3 times. They set out early in the morning in a large van. Each alien wore their protective suit, though Dr. Wright had convinced them to use the lighter day-trip versions that were less bulky. The mountains formed through tectonic activity, Dr. Wright explained as they drove. Earth's crust moves and shifts over millions of years. Your planet's surface is unstable. Professor Zixforel's eye stalks quivered. It can change without warning. Well, earthquakes happen, but they're rare in this region, John said from the driver's seat. These mountains have been stable for thousands of years. They parked at a scenic overlook with a hiking trail. The view was spectacular. Snow-capped mountains reflected in a clear lake, surrounded by pine forests. Even the aliens seemed impressed. The visual input is not unpleasant, admitted Vix Nura, her crystalline form catching the sunlight. Look at all those plants, clicked Zreet. They've evolved to grow on vertical surfaces. Remarkable adaptation. Dr. Wright smiled. Would anyone like to try a short walk? The trail is easy and flat. The aliens nervously agreed. They moved in a tight group, jumping at every sound. A bird call made Bloop form into a defensive sphere. A squirrel darting across the path caused Elytrix to shift partially into another dimension in panic. Then everything changed when they turned a corner in the trail. A deer stood about 50 feet away, peacefully munching on leaves. It was a young buck with small antlers. Apex Predator, screamed Krellax, his tentacles flailing inside his suit. Enormous beast. Zreet's mandibles clicked rapidly in terror. Back to the vehicle, ordered Professor Zixforel. The aliens retreated in chaos, tripping over each other to get back to the van. Dr. Wright and John hurried after them, confused by their reaction. What happened? Dr. Wright asked when they reached the van. The aliens were inside with the doors locked, their suits' emergency systems activated. Massive predator, gasped Professor Zixforel, equipped with bone spears on its head. Bone spears? John looked confused. Wait, do you mean the deer? Is that what you call it? Vix Nura's voice trembled. The death dealer. Dr. Wright tried not to laugh. It's an herbivore. It only eats plants. Those antlers are just for competition with other males. The aliens stared at her in disbelief. Not dangerous? Asked Bloop. Not at all, confirmed John. Children often feed them by hand in some parks. Children. Elytrix shifted nervously. Your young approached these creatures. Dr. Wright decided it was time to return to the research station. The aliens refused to exit the van again, watching the passing landscape with new fear in their eyes. Back at the station, they received a visit from Ranger Lisa Carter, who brought educational materials about local wildlife. She showed them trail camera footage of the area's animals. "Here's a black bear that lives about 5 miles from here," she said, pointing to a video of a large bear digging for roots. "And these are mountain lions," she continued, showing footage of the sleek predators. "They're quite shy around humans. These are considered normal wildlife." Professor Zixvorel asked faintly. "Pretty standard for Wyoming." Ranger Carter nodded. "We also have wolves, moose, and occasionally grizzly bears further north." After she left, the professor immediately contacted the Galactic University of Xenobiology. "Requesting immediate evacuation," he said urgently. "Earth is even more dangerous than reported. Gigantic predators roam freely." The university administrator looked unimpressed. "Your request is denied, Professor. Your team has reported no injuries. Continue the research mission as planned." That night, the 5 students held a secret meeting in Krulax's room. "How do humans survive here?" Zreet asked. "Those creatures we saw in the videos could tear them apart." "Perhaps humans themselves are predators," suggested Elytrix. "They evolved in this death trap of a planet. Maybe they're the most dangerous species of all." The others considered this theory with growing unease. "It would explain a lot," Vix Nura said slowly. "Their casual attitude toward danger. Their resistance to environmental hazards," added Bloop. "We should observe them more carefully," Krulax decided. "Watch for signs of predatory behavior." They all agreed, suddenly seeing their human hosts in a new and frightening light. 2 weeks into their stay on Earth, Dr. Wright suggested they visit the nearby town of Pine Ridge. The aliens were nervous after their park experience, but also curious to observe human social structures up close. "We'll keep it simple," Dr. Wright promised. "Just a walk down Main Street, lunch at the diner, and maybe stop at a few shops." The aliens disguised themselves in human-shaped environmental suits with dark visors. From a distance, they looked like people wearing unusual clothes. Up close, their odd movements gave them away. "Remember our new theory," Elytrix whispered as they approached town. "Observe for predatory behaviors." Pine Ridge was a small town with wooden buildings, American flags, and friendly people who waved at strangers. The aliens stayed close together, watching everything with suspicious eyes. "Notice how they bare their teeth at each other," Vix Nura murmured, recording a video of people smiling. "Is that a dominance display?" "They're just smiling," John explained. "It's friendly." "A trap to lower the guard of prey," Krulax suggested quietly. Their first stop was the town square, where a child's birthday party was happening. Colorful balloons tied to a picnic table bounced in the breeze. "What are those floating objects?" asked Zreet, pointing nervously. "Balloons," said Dr. Wright. "They're toys filled with helium. They move on their own," Bloop noted with alarm. "Are they alive?" "No, just floating on air currents." Professor Zixvorel studied the balloons intensely. "Humans have domesticated some type of atmospheric creature. They're just rubber with gas inside," John tried to explain, but the aliens kept a safe distance from the balloons. Next, they passed the local diner where the cook was grilling burgers. Flames rose from the grill. "Fire," gasped Professor Zixvorel. "Inside a building." "It's controlled," Dr. Wright assured them. "Humans used fire for cooking." "They harness fire." Elytrix's multidimensional form shifted nervously, one of the most destructive forces in nature. "We've been using fire for thousands of years," John said. "It's perfectly safe when managed properly." The aliens exchanged meaningful glances, more evidence of human toughness. As they continued walking, a golden retriever approached them, wagging its tail. It belonged to a woman getting coffee nearby. "Hello there," the dog's owner called. "Don't worry, Max is friendly." But the aliens only saw a 4-legged creature with sharp teeth running toward them. Zreet panicked first, his insectoid instincts taking over. He jumped surprisingly high for his small size and scrambled up a nearby tree, clinging to the trunk with his 6 limbs. Predator attack. He clicked in terror. The other aliens backed away quickly. Bloop formed into a protective ball. Krulax raised his tentacles in a defensive posture. Max the dog, confused by their reaction, sat down and tilted his head. "I'm so sorry," Dr. Wright told the dog's owner. "My friends aren't used to dogs." The woman nodded sympathetically. "No problem. Come on, Max." It took 20 minutes to convince Sri to come down from the tree. "Humans keep predators as pets?" he asked shakily. "Dogs aren't predators," John explained. "Well, they evolved from wolves, but they've been domesticated for thousands of years. They're companions." Companions. Professor Zixvorl's eye stalks quivered. "You form social bonds with other species." Before they could discuss this further, a loud siren began to wail. It was the town's monthly emergency system test, but the aliens didn't know that. "Planetary alert," shouted Krulax. "Catastrophe warning." The aliens ran in circles, bumping into each other in panic. Vix Nura's crystalline form flashed bright colors in distress. Bloop oozed partially out of his suit in his haste to activate emergency protocols. "It's just a test," Dr. Wright tried to explain over the noise. "They do this once a month to make sure the warning system works." "You practice for disasters regularly?" Professor Zixvorl asked when the siren stopped. "Of course," John replied. "Better to be prepared." The aliens fell into thoughtful silence. These humans lived constantly ready for disaster, surrounded by dangerous creatures, harnessing fire, and somehow finding it all normal. "I think we've seen enough for today," Professor Zixvorl said quietly. "Let's return to the station." On the drive back, the aliens were unusually quiet, processing everything they had observed. Their theory about humans being dangerous was gaining evidence. "They're not just surviving here," Elytrix whispered to the others. "They're thriving in conditions that would kill most species." "What does that tell us about humans themselves?" None of them had a comforting answer. 3 weeks into their Earth visit, the weather forecast predicted a thunderstorm. Dr. Wright didn't think much of it. Just a typical spring storm in Wyoming. But when she mentioned it to Professor Zixvorl, his reaction surprised her. "We must activate emergency protocols," he said, all 4 eye stalks rigid with alarm. "Secure all equipment and prepare the shelters." "It's just a thunderstorm," Dr. Wright explained. "Some rain, wind, maybe some lightning. Nothing serious." The professor stared at her. "You consider atmospheric electrical discharges and falling liquid nothing serious." Word spread quickly among the alien students. By mid-afternoon, they were in full disaster preparation mode. Krulax filled his water tank with emergency supplies. Vix Nura reinforced her crystalline structure. Zreet sealed his room with a special webbing. Bloop formed himself into a protective shape and refused to change back. "Maybe we should show them radar maps," John suggested. "Help them understand what's coming." Dr. Wright nodded. "Good idea. Let's set up in the common room." They used the large screen to display weather radar, showing the storm system moving toward them. Instead of calming the aliens, this made things worse. "It's enormous," gasped Elytrix. "A planetary scale event." "Not at all," John said. "It's just a local storm cell. See these colors? Yellow means moderate rain, red means heavier rain. It'll pass over us in about 2 hours. You can predict the disaster's movement." Professor Zixvorl seemed impressed despite his fear. "Sure. Weather forecasting is pretty accurate these days." Around dinner time, the storm arrived. First came the wind, rattling the windows. The aliens huddled together in the common room, their emergency systems activated. "The atmosphere is attacking," whispered Zreet. Then rain began to fall, pattering on the roof and streaming down the windows. Lightning flashed, followed by a rumble of thunder. "Atmospheric weapons," cried Krulax. "The planet is defending itself." Another lightning bolt struck closer, illuminating the room with bright light. Thunder crashed almost immediately after, shaking the building slightly. "Energy discharge." Vix Nura's crystalline form flickered in distress. The storm intensified. Rain pounded the research station. Wind howled around the corners. Lightning and thunder came in quick succession. Then the lights went out. In the sudden darkness, the aliens' panic reached new heights. Their suits' emergency lights activated, casting strange shadows around the room. "Power failure," announced Professor Zixforel. "Communication systems down." He pulled out an emergency transmitter. "I must send a final report to the university. If we don't survive, someone should know what happened." Dr. Wright entered with a flashlight. "Just a power outage. The backup generator will kick in soon." "How can you be so calm?" asked Elatrix. "Your shelter has lost defenses during a planetary attack." "It's not an attack," Dr. Wright said gently. "It's just weather. Happens all the time." "All the time." Bloop's gelatinous form quivered. "These conditions are regular." John came in carrying several mugs. "I made hot chocolate on the gas stove. Thought it might help everyone relax." The aliens watched in amazement as the humans casually dealt with what they considered an apocalyptic event. Dr. Wright showed them her tablet, which still had the weather radar loaded. "See, the storm cell is moving through. The worst has already passed us." The backup generator hummed to life, and some of the lights came back on. Outside, the thunder grew more distant. "You live with this constant threat," Professor Zixforel said slowly. "Electrical discharges from the sky, atmospheric pressure changes, falling water. And you just adapt," added Vix Nura. "Of course," Dr. Wright smiled. "That's what humans do." Later that night, after the storm passed and full power was restored, the aliens gathered in Elatrix's room. "Did you notice," Krellax said quietly, "that Dr. Wright and John went to sleep during the final phase of the storm? They slept through environmental combat." Shriek clicked softly. "Their threat assessment systems must be incredibly advanced." "Or incredibly dulled," suggested Vix Nura. "Perhaps they've seen so much danger that they no longer register it." "Either way," Professor Zixforel concluded, "we're learning something important about humans. They've adapted not just physically to this death world, but psychologically. They've normalized constant danger." The aliens fell silent, contemplating what it would take to evolve such resilience. Outside, the last raindrops fell from the leaves of trees, and the night grew peaceful again. As their second month on Earth began, each alien student experienced something that changed their understanding of the planet and its human inhabitants. For Krellax, it happened during another lake study session. He was taking samples from the shore, his tentacles carefully manipulating equipment through his protective suit. Dr. Wright had convinced him to use a lighter suit model since his previous tests showed the lake water wasn't harmful to his species. "These microorganisms are fascinating," Krellax said, examining a water sample. "So many varieties living together." He leaned forward to get a better view through his portable microscope. The bank was muddy from recent rain. His foot slipped. "Help!" he cried as he tumbled forward into the shallow water. His protective suit hit a rock and tore open along one seam. Lake water touched his blue skin directly. "I'm melting. I'm dissolving." Krellax thrashed in panic, splashing water everywhere. Dr. Wright rushed to help him. "Stay calm. You're not dissolving." Krellax stopped thrashing and realized something important. The water wasn't hurting him. His tentacles were wet but undamaged. His skin wasn't burning. I'm not dying," he said in wonder. "Your species is actually somewhat amphibious," Dr. Wright explained, helping him to shore. "Your preliminary biology reports suggested water would be safe for you. That's why I encouraged the lighter suit." Krellax touched the water with one tentacle deliberately. Nothing happened. "Would you like to try swimming?" Dr. Wright asked with a smile. By the end of the day, Krellax was happily splashing in the shallow water, his fear completely forgotten. Vix Nura's breakthrough came in town. She was observing the local bakery when a small fire broke out in the kitchen. Nothing serious, just an oven fire quickly extinguished. But the baker, Frank Nelson, lost a full day's worth of bread and pastries. What surprised Vix Nura wasn't the fire. Earth's dangers were expected. But what happened next? Neighbors brought ingredients. Other shop owners offered space in their ovens. By afternoon, the bakery had fresh bread again. Why did those humans help him? Vix Nura asked John. There was no biological advantage. That's what communities do, John explained. We help each other through hard times. Social cooperation as a survival strategy, Vix Nura noted. Fascinating. Zreet discovered gardening with Betty White, an elderly woman who lived near the research station. She showed him how she planted flowers and vegetables in neat rows. You control plant growth. Zreet clicked in surprise. Tell them where to grow. In a way, Betty laughed. Plants and humans help each other. They give us food and oxygen. We give them good soil and protection. Zreet spent hours helping Betty plant tomatoes, his fear of Earth's plant life slowly changing to respect. Bloop's moment came through technology. Olivia Garcia, a teenage girl interested in science, visited the station and showed him her smartphone, tablet, and laptop. Humans use technology to overcome environmental challenges, Bloop realized as Olivia demonstrated weather apps, GPS navigation, and emergency alerts. I guess we do, Olivia said. I never thought about it that way. For Elytrix, understanding came while observing a minor emergency. 8-year-old Kyle Johnson fell off his bike outside the research station and broke his arm. Elytrix watched in amazement as the boy cried but remained calm while his mother called for help. At the small local clinic, Elytrix observed the treatment. X-rays, a cast, pain medication, and a popsicle that made Kyle smile despite his injury. The child suffered bone failure. Elytrix told Dr. Wright, "On my world, such damage would be life-threatening." "Kids are resilient," Dr. Wright said. "He'll heal in about 6 weeks." And this is normal. Completely. Most humans break a bone at least once in their lives. Even Professor Zixforl's perspective was changing. He found himself admiring human adaptability more and more. They don't just survive here, he told the students during their evening meeting. They've developed technologies, social systems, and psychological traits specifically designed to thrive in conditions that would kill most sentient beings. Are humans the most adaptable species we've encountered? Asked Vix Nura. Professor Zixforl's eye stalks moved in the equivalent of a slow nod. Perhaps they are. None of the aliens noticed Dr. Wright listening from the hallway, smiling to herself as she heard their newfound respect for humanity. As their 3-month study of Earth neared its end, the alien students worked hard on their final presentations for the Galactic University. They had come to Earth believing it was a deadly planet where survival seemed impossible. Now their views had completely changed. "We need a new classification for Earth," Vix Nura said during their final group meeting. "Deathworld doesn't capture what this planet truly is." "What about the Crucible?" suggested Elytrix, "a place where extreme conditions have forged an extraordinarily resilient species." They all agreed, and Professor Zixforl officially updated their report. Each student prepared their individual findings. Krellax studied human swimming and water sports, amazed that humans voluntarily submerged themselves in water for fun. Vix Nura documented human social cooperation as an evolutionary advantage. Zreet mapped how humans and plants existed in mutual benefit. Bloop analyzed human technological innovation as a response to environmental challenges. Elytrix focused on human psychological resilience. Humans have extraordinary physical capabilities, Krellax explained during their practice presentation. They can repair broken bones, recover from illness, and adapt to different environments. Their social structures provide collective security, added Vix Nura. They help each other without direct biological advantage. Most importantly, concluded Zreet, they see challenges as opportunities, not threats. This mindset is unique among known species. Professor Zixforl listened with pride. His students had learned far more than he expected. He had also prepared a separate classified report for galactic security about human capabilities. On their final night on Earth, Dr. Wright and John organized a small campfire behind the research station. They roasted marshmallows and hot dogs while the aliens watched from a safe distance. "Is fire not dangerous?" asked Professor Six-Forel, still nervous despite weeks on Earth. "It can be," admitted Dr. Wright. "But we've learned to control it, respect it, and use it safely." John started telling ghost stories, his face eerily lit by the firelight. The aliens listened in confusion. "You create narratives about dangerous situations for entertainment?" asked Elatrix. "Sure," John grinned. "It's fun to scare ourselves sometimes." "Recreational fear," noted Bloop. "Fascinating psychological exercise." As the fire died down, Dr. Wright asked about their conclusions. "What will you tell a university about Earth?" Professor Six-Forel's eye stalks moved thoughtfully. "That we were wrong about your world. Yes, Earth has environmental hazards, but they're not what make this planet special. What makes Earth remarkable is how those challenges have shaped humans." The aliens returned to their ship the next morning. Their environmental suits were lighter now, adjusted to Earth conditions they no longer feared. Each student looked back at the research station as they boarded. "I might visit again someday," said Krellax. "There are still many oceans I haven't seen." "I want to study more human social groups," added Vixnura. Back at the Galactic University a week later, their presentation caused a sensation. The lecture hall was filled with professors and students eager to hear about the infamous Deathworld. "Earth is not just a planet of dangers," Elatrix explained to the audience. "It's a planet of possibilities. Its harsh conditions have created a species that doesn't just survive. It adapts, innovates, and thrives." The audience was skeptical at first, but the evidence was convincing. The university updated its classification of Earth from Class 12 Deathworld to Class 12 Crucible World, with a special note about human adaptability. Meanwhile, Professor Six-Forel's report to galactic security caused serious concern among officials. It contained a clear warning. In their natural habitat, humans find ways to not merely survive, but thrive amid constant danger. Should they ever feel threatened by the wider galaxy, remember they are evolutionary champions of a world we classify as unsurvivable. Proceed accordingly. On Earth, Dr. Amy Wright read the students' published paper and smiled. She packed her camping gear for a weekend trip to Yellowstone, planning to hike, fish, and sleep under the stars, activities that qualified as extreme survival challenges on most alien worlds. As she drove away from the research station, she wondered what the aliens would think of winter, with its snow, ice, and below-freezing temperatures. Maybe next year's alien students would find out. She hoped they'd be just as fun to terrify with ordinary Earth things.